Welcome to Hold My Cutter. We're coming your way here, Burned by Rocky Patel, and our guest, Ted Anthony.
Oh, you're doing it. Oh, that's...
If you're watching this, you know what we're doing. We've got the flame up. We started the stogie, the edge.
What a great
if you're
sound.
Listening, that's a great sound.
That's a great sound.
This is.
You've been perfecting that for a while, huh?
I have not. Our guest, Ted Anthony, has, however.
I'm telling you, it's your intro.
It's the new intro. You want to try it, Fort?
Oh, let me see.
Oh, is that good?
This is what I wish I felt like when I was hitting. Just on fire!
Michael McHenry comes to the plate.
And it just...
Sizzling hot. And yeah, our guest is Ted Anthony. He has suggested, and boy, what a good call, The Edge. We've had The Edge previously here at Burned by Rocky Patel, which is just a few blocks down the road. You can see PNC Park just across the way. We can see where Michael McHenry works most nights.
Works?
At Sportsnet Pittsburgh. Works.
Is that right?
You're a working.
You're the writer.
You're a working.
I'm a working.
The two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee by the Associated Press. He started with the AP. Started in, I think, 1992, if I'm not mistaken, when the Pirates were winning their third straight National League East title. So it's been a while. But he really got his start, and Ted Anthony writes American culture, international affairs, has reported from more than 30 countries, but he really got his start as a 10-year-old, right?
Wait. Boy genius?
He is
like
a boy
Sheldon?
genius,
No.
yes.
Yeah?
Cranky 10-year-old. So my first published piece of writing was in the Post-Gazette in 1978, and I was 10, and I was a big fan of the lumber company. I guess by that point it was Lumber and Lightning. And Milo Hamilton and Lanny Fratteri were in your seat. And people were not liking Milo Hamilton. They were hating on Milo Hamilton a lot then. And
Why is that?
I think they felt like he was not. Well, first of all, I mean, it was the obvious Bob Prince.
He was replacing a legend, Bob Prince.
And people were not.
So he could not fill those shoes.
Someone, I forget who it was in one of your episodes, said, you got to be here 5 years and then it tips over, right?
Yeah, we talked about that.
And it hadn't happened yet. And it never would happen for Milo Hamilton, but I adored Milo Hamilton. I thought he was
That makes
great.
two of us.
He's how I sort of came into my baseball consciousness.
Same here.
Right?
Yep.
And I still remember him, and I heard this recently, and it was exactly as I remembered him calling Candelaria's no-hitter in '76, against the Dodgers. And so people were writing in this stuff, and I was pissed. I was not happy about it. We were a newspaper family. We took both papers. Back then you used the word took to take to get a paper. You don't get the paper, you take the paper. So we took both papers, And so I decided I'm going to write in. I had been calling in occasionally to KDKA, to things like, I don't know if you'll probably remember, like Roy Fox and Perry Marshall.
All of them.
Fox
Trish Beatty.
Yeah, Trish Beatty, absolutely. Art Palin.
Art Palin.
And my mother actually won a contest to write a poem about the Pirates, and Art Palin went to the ball game with her.
Oh, my gosh.
Ago. Yeah. But,
by the way, Ted, is this familiar? I have seen so many letters putting Milo Hamilton and Lanny Fratteri down.
Oh, boy.
One I refer to in particular is a letter sent by John P. Engel, which appeared in the July 18th Post-Gazette. Let me quote him. If he, Hamilton, would shut up long enough to let people who know baseball think, it would be a pleasure. End quote. Now, between pitches, Hamilton gives listeners tidbits of information about the players because he thinks that they would like to know these statistics. Now, if Mr. Eagle, with Mr. Engel thinks that this is not worthwhile, then maybe he should turn off the radio between pitches.
He thought he was an eagle. That's for sure.
Bad printing.
I can't believe you excavated that.
Allison Park, Ted Anthony, as a 10-year-old. It was actually, the date was Wednesday, July 25th. Letters to the sports editor in the Post-Gazette defending Milo Hamilton.
I got to give you props for excavating such a deep cut, man.
Well, actually...
That's incredible.
Well, no, what's incredible is he gave us so much nice information. Normally we have to do prep, which we still did. I felt guilty. I didn't have to do enough prep, but I wanted to make sure I did that. So there you are as a 10-year-old defending Milo Hamilton.
I never thought it would be published. I was just tilting at windmills, and...
You were 10.
I was 10.
I was playing with... the Turtles, Ninja Turtles.
Well, in fairness, my parents
and G.I. Joes.
My parents
You're writing for paper.
They were linguists at Pitt. So, I mean, I had a little bit of the word
stuff
in me. But
you made a choice. That's amazing.
I did make a choice. But that was the first of a lot of verbiage that's been expelled. Let's put it that way. But it was, and I think in a way that was like, and my friends saw it. People who read that was like the sports op-ed. Right?
Yes, yes.
And I had friends in school who read it, and I was like, okay, so this is pretty cool. This could be powerful. You know, you can reach people, and that was that was the beginning of it, I guess. One of the seeds.
When did the love start? Because I mean, you're 10, so you got published at 10, so you had to start at what, 4?
I don't know if it was that far. I
was on Hooked on Phonics.
Yeah, that's right.
It didn't work for me either. Like, that's incredible to me.
Yeah.
10 years old.
Yeah.
So when did it start?
I think, I mean, I was always a word person. We played word games at the dinner table. My father told horrible puns, which, you know, that gets you to start
jokes.
Good dad. Do you remember a good dad joke?
Okay, a good dad joke. When we were living in China in '79, we had a tiny little Christmas tree because, you know, they didn't have Christmas trees in China back then. They didn't have Christmas, and so we get this tiny little tree, and it starts slouching. And my father says, "I believe we need a chiropractor. That tree clearly has curvature of the pine."
Oh,
Yeah,
that is great.
it's also awful.
No, it's great, but it's so
awfully
good.
good.
Yeah.
Stop, please stop.
Please stop. So you're in China, a Pirates fan in China. How did it all start?
Wow.
All right. So my parents, like I said, were linguistics professors at Pitt, and my father was running the Asian Studies department. And we got an invitation. What happened was China had just opened up to Americans on January 1st, '79. Carter and Deng Xiaoping normalized relations. And there's this whole rush of people to go teach in China, but they were all in their early 20s and they didn't know how to teach. Their only experience was that they spoke English. And so around about April of that year, they started looking at mid-career linguists like my parents at Pitt. And Pitt had a good relationship with some educational institutions in China. So we got set to go over, and we were going to go over in July. And let me just ask both of you, what was starting to happen in July of 1979 over at Three River Stadium?
A lot of good things.
A lot of
July
good things.
1979.
And
Pirates were in the pennant race.
I was not happy. We had a
You let me answer?
What's that?
I was 6 years pre-sperm. Yeah. So
That's one way.
I was born in '85. So.
Interesting way to put it. Okay,
Yeah.
so anyway, go
Yeah,
back
here we
to
go.
That threw me
Hold my
off my
cutter.
game.
Yeah, me too.
I was just thinking, like, man, 79. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
So we had a guy in our neighborhood, Dr. Connolly, who co-owned a car wash with Phil Garner. So we'd have
Oh my gosh.
we'd
Wow.
have baseball parties in our neighborhood, and you know, people like Phil Garner and Candelaria and later Donnie Robinson would come and pitch us tennis balls. And
How cool.
And I'm
Wow.
going. Meanwhile, I'm at Falk School up at the University of Pittsburgh School up on the hill by where Pitt Stadium used to be, and went to school with Willie Stargell's kids. And you know, Willie Stargell would show up in his leisure suit of '79 with these pointed collars that made Saturday Night Live or Saturday Night Fever look conservative, and he'd give out Stargell stars that year. So I still have actual real Stargell stars, and my sister gave me back one of them a couple years ago, and I just absolutely treasure it. But so I'm entrenched with the Pirates that year, and suddenly we're going off to China. And I was like, you've ruined my life.
Yeah, you don't want to
And
leave.
it was not cool. And I dealt with it. So I get there, and, you know, we're learning Chinese really fast because there was no international school really back then. So I went to the one school that had international students. And I was going to school with North Koreans and Burmese and Bangladeshis. And I went to the party when Rhodesia became Zimbabwe at the embassy, stuff like that. But I'm all about baseball at that point. And I have my 28-inch Louisville Slugger Rod Carew model with me. And I'm trying to teach these guys baseball because they've never, from all these countries, they didn't really know. And there are only a couple other Americans. And I'm out there on the playground, you know, with a bat. I'm like you on the post-game show, you know, holding the bat and swinging it
Always.
around. And trying to teach people bangqiu, which is what baseball is called in China.
Bangqiu.
And so the Pirates are getting better and better. No internet, no nothing. So my grandmother is sending me clips from the St. Petersburg Times. We hit the playoffs. We do well in the playoffs, hit the World Series. And I'm like, if they make it to Game 7, I have to find a way to listen to this, right? So I had a friend, and he was half American, half Chinese. He lived in our compound, and his father had been one of Chairman Mao's confidants during the early part of China. And then,
What?
And then no, this is true.
Jeez.
Wait, how old are you at this time?
At this time, I'm 11. right? But I was published.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
You're already an adult.
Yeah, that's right.
He's smoking a cigar right in published
At 11,
pieces.
that's right.
Yeah, at 11.
Yeah, but it was a black and mild, you know. He was one of Chair Mao's confidants, and then he got like purged and imprisoned. And he had just gotten out of prison. He had come back to the house, and he had this shortwave radio, and it looked like this thing from like some 1940s army movie, and it was this giant console on his coffee table. And I thought, I could, VOA, Armed Forces Radio. Maybe I could listen to the game. So I asked my friend asked his father.
Come on.
I get invited over to listen to the 7th game of the World Series at like 7 in the morning. Skip school. My parents let me skip school.
What?
Yeah, because that's probably a 12-hour time difference?
Yeah, it's 12 or 13 depending on the daylight savings, so I forget what it was then. But
holy smokes.
So we're listening to it, and all my friends, of course, took the opportunity to skip school because this was a little event. So we're all gathered around this big console, and we're listening to it.
Memory.
It wasn't Milo and Lanny, unfortunately, but it was Armed Forces Radio. But like when Stargell hits the home run off of Scotty McGregor, I'm like in heaven. And here the Pirates win the World Series. And, for years I said to my parents, we could have been there. And now I look back on it and I'm like, okay, this is a better story than having been there.
Yeah.
So, I'm still, years later I told Willie's daughter, Kelly, who I went to school with. She's a wonderful person. And she loved that story that I was listening to it at 7 in the morning, skipping school in China.
That's
incredible. Do you speak Chinese? Do you remember it?
I do. I worked there for the AP for several years. But when you learn a language, and again, this goes back to my parents being linguists, when you learn a language, there's up until about 9, you can learn it really easily, but then you forget it when you leave. Anytime after age 12, it's really hard to learn. And you can keep it when you learn it, but it's hard to learn. But between 9 and 12, there's this window. And so I was going to a Chinese school, and stuff was being taught in Chinese, so I had to catch up. And that was...
You're just thrown in the fire.
What's that?
You're just thrown in the fire.
Right, exactly. And it was learn or else, and if you wanted to communicate with all these kids from all these other countries who didn't speak English, but they were speaking Chinese, that's what you had to do. And so I got it, and I love the language. The language is... It's musical. It's the characters are fascinating. I miss speaking it every day.
No, you can't read the characters.
I can.
You can read Chinese.
Yeah,
was that by 11 too?
I mean, it's not a question of by 11. We were learning like 11-year-old Chinese kids. So
as you grew.
I read, and when I went back to China for the AP, I found that after a while the character knowledge came back. But the problem was, I only had the knowledge of a 12-year-old. So like economics, politics, sex. I had to learn all of that stuff because that wasn't part of a 12-year-old's vocabulary, right?
When did you go back to China? So first of all, when did you leave? How old were you when you left?
We were just there a year.
Just 1 year.
But when you're 11, a year's like one
Sure.
10th of your life.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, you're like a dog.
Yeah,
Like,
so
oh my gosh, this is so long.
Right.
Yeah.
So when did you go back, Ted?
I went back in 01 and stayed until 04, and we moved there like 7 weeks before 9/11. So
now this is you and your family.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a family. I had just gotten married.
Okay.
We moved there about 7 weeks before 9/11, and so the 3 years in China was like, we thought China was going to be this really cool place that we could just sort of travel around in and write about and stuff. And it turned out I got sent all over the place after 9/11 and to cover the aftermath. And it was not, it was fascinating. And it was in some ways, I realized years later, kind of traumatizing to be in those conflict zones. But it wasn't the China experience remotely that we expected, because we had this whole group of this journalism community in Beijing and who had all come there to cover China. But we were all getting rotated in and out of Pakistan and Afghanistan and then later Iraq. And so it was really interesting. It was almost like a graduating class that keeps in touch, because there was this group of people who they were there when the big thing happened, and they and their spouses had to make their lives around this, right?
That's how you really come together.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
You
still talk to a lot of them?
Oh, yeah. And some of them I was in Afghanistan and Iraq with, some of them. And so it was...
what was that like?
Which one?
Either one.
Yeah.
Start with Afghanistan.
Well, so Afghanistan will always be endlessly fascinating to me. My father had spent time there teaching in '51, like long before I was born. And he would tell me about it. And there were these things I grew up with in the house. Like there was this one fan for the fire that looked like a 16th century executioner's hatchet. And There was a tobacco canister and stuff, and these were part
That's
of
how I fan my fire too.
these are part of the landscape of my childhood, and I didn't think much of them. And then I went back to Afghanistan to cover stuff, and you see this stuff. You know, I mean, you walk around Pittsburgh, and there are things that you would see and pick up on that you wouldn't if you weren't from here. And that's the same thing. I was seeing these things from my house, but in the world. But in terms of covering it, I mean, it was scary. There was a lot of potential for things to go south. There was, it's not the talk about the glamour of being a foreign correspondent. I mean, it's hugely rewarding. You get to know the culture. You get to understand things. You get a front row seat to history. But it's not like, I mean, it's scary. And I don't recall a day where I didn't have situational awareness that was way too much because I couldn't get rid of it for a lot of years afterwards.
Can you share the greatest moment, like one that just give you like chills thinking about it, and then the scariest moment in Afghanistan?
So I think that's a good question. Okay, the greatest moment is I went to this restaurant in the Sharanah neighborhood of Kabul and was talking to this waiter and with my translator. And the waiter was really nice and sweet, and I had a digital camera around my neck. And he said he'd never had a picture taken of him.
Holy
ever.
cow.
Wow.
So I took a picture of him and showed it to him on the back of the early digital camera, and he said, "Can I have one?" I said, I don't have a printer. I can't really give you one." And he was disappointed, and we parted very friendly, but he was disappointed. 6 months later, I come back for another assignment there, and before I came, made sure I got a printout of the picture of him, and we went back to the restaurant and found him, and I handed him an 8x10 of himself. He'd never seen a picture of himself.
Wow.
And he,
wow.
I bet he lit up, didn't he?
He was like Tashakur, which is thank you, and he was so moved. And to me, that made the whole thing. It's like you make a
So
little
intentional
difference.
by you. That's so cool.
You make a little difference in someone's life, and
Yeah.
you're thinking about, okay, Afghanistan has been, a lot of people feel like they've been occupied for years and years and years, that they're not sure what to think of the United States, and maybe you can build a little bridge in that tiny little way, and I love that,
I think that's amazing.
And
Now-
that was that. I think of that to this day, and I still have the picture too. I mean,
that's
That
cool.
is super cool.
so scariest. I mean, I don't talk about that stuff a lot, but there was.
That's why I said if you don't want to.
No, I
'cause
don't.
I've heard a lot of military side, and it's very fascinating to me here journalist side.
And I want to make a really important point. This is very, very different from the military. I can leave at any time.
Right.
Military people can't. And
But
so
you can.
never.
I love the perspective that you could have because you do have a 10,000-foot view.
Yeah,
And you go in and out.
And that is hugely rewarding. But I just want to make sure that we don't.
No doubt. No doubt.
So we're going through this sort of mountain pass to this place called the Panjshir Valley, which is where a lot of the battles had taken place over the years, and it was on the way to Bagram Air Base, which is where the U.S. was based at that time. And we're stopped at a checkpoint, and a guy comes running toward our car, screaming at the top of his lungs and pointing an AK-47 at me.
oh my gosh.
And I'm just petrified. And anybody who tells you that you're not scared, you just suck it up. I mean, maybe they can, but
No, every human being, you see down a barrel of a gun, you're terrified. I
And
don't care what
it turns out that this guy was worried because there had been an accident up ahead, and he didn't want us to go and get into a problem. He was helping, but he was a guy who was guarding the checkpoint and had an AK-47, so there was no threat. But I didn't know that until I got the translation.
Right.
So that was one of the more terrifying incidents
I'm sure
in my life.
because you have no clue, and he's going ballistic.
But he's going ballistic, and in a way that is on our behalf. And
Right.
it's also a good lesson, which is that you don't know people's intentions, right?
Truth. Well said.
Ted, you talked about, 79, you're in China listening to the Pirates, and then long stretch of not winning. You meant 92, I think you started the AP, right?
Yeah. And before the AP, I was at the Harrisburg Patriot News, which is, I think, your hometown paper, isn't it?
Yes.
Originally?
That's right. We had talked about that previously. I forgot about that. That's right. I grew up in Central PA, and Harrisburg Patriot News was our hometown newspaper. And then later, Pirates get back into the playoffs 20-some years later, and you're on the road again, aren't you?
Well, I did make 2013.
Okay.
So
were you at the wild card game?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's how we met. I mean, I had done the Pittsburgh Magazine cover story on the Pittsburghers of the Year after that season, and so that's
the Pirates were the Pittsburghers of the Year, and Ted wrote an unbelievable essay, great story. He's a brilliant, gifted writer, and you can tell as you hear him talk, he's incredible.
And a lot of focus on the blackout, which obviously you know well.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. Is there anything to match that? Everybody that's come on, I believe,
that's a great question
for Ted. Yeah, because you've been all over. Everybody said it's their favorite.
I have never been to anything like that.
Explain it, Ted, from your perspective. Where were you? Where was your seat?
So
who were you with?
Our seat. I was with my wife and our two sons who were very young then. The one who was already a big Travis Snider fan that year, and the other one who was a huge Russell Martin. The other one who was a huge Russell Martin guy, and we're up in. I don't know exactly what the section was. It must have been like 323. It's that little one that's like the wedge shape in the middle of two in the upper deck on the left field. It's like
left field. Okay,
it's a little wedge shape.
Yes.
And people were offering my kids beers. But
what a memory for those kids.
Yeah.
Well, they took it up later.
So as they're smoking their Black and Miles.
But it was, I mean, and when it got so loud, and Cueto dropped the ball, and Russell Martin, of course, homered, and it was probably, and I went to Penn State, and so I mean, I've been to games with 110,000 people, and I almost got trampled at one Notre Dame game in '87. But this was, I mean, you were there. It was,
but not in the stands.
No,
but it's a different perspective from people in the stands.
It felt,
and someone that's covered so much. Your perspective is like priceless.
You know what I remember the most? My father used to tell me that when he was growing up in Cleveland, he would go to League Park and try to look in through like the slats and the fences, and I remember looking on the Clemente Bridge, and there were people gathered on the Clemente Bridge, and they were watching the game. They could only see like maybe a third of it or a half, but they were there, and they wanted to. I don't even think they wanted necessarily to see and process the game as much as they just wanted to be a part of this moment in Pittsburgh. And that was, we had moved back to Pittsburgh to take care of my parents in '07, and that was the moment I really sort of viscerally felt like a Pittsburgher again. Was when that happened, and when everybody was in it for one thing, and you felt like, to be honest, and I mean, I'm sure you picked up on this, that kind of crowd can be intimidating and even a little bit menacing. My older son was a little freaked out by it, but he didn't leave. He didn't want to miss anything.
Yeah, sure.
But the fact that all of that energy was channeled into something that we all had in common, that was incredible.
That tells you about Pittsburgh and sports and the Pirates and the history. And was it not that year, didn't you also wrote a great essay about your mom? And you brought her back to, she was a big Bill Robinson fan.
Yeah, she was.
Right?
Yeah, we used to go down. There was a bank. It's now been absorbed 10 times over by PNC. It was called Franklin Federal, and they had a thing on the South Side. And they were. My mother loved Bill Robinson because when my mother was the most into baseball was '76, '77, really, and that was his heyday with the Pirates, right? And so we go down, and it's going to be Bill Robinson and Dave Parker, and they both sign autographs. They're both perfectly nice, and there's huge crowds around Parker. They want to see the Cobra, and Robinson had some, but it was less intense. And so after everybody left, Robinson's hanging around, and he and my mother get into this conversation, and they talk, and she's like, this is baseball to me. And so when she was about to turn 90, and she was having trouble walking, she said she wished she could see a Pirate game again. And it was 2013, and
you were like, "This is happening."
It was September, and we got some help from. So we went in the entrance you go into with the elevators, and we got some help to get her up to her seats. We were in Pittsburgh Baseball Club seats, so that she could go inside if she needed to the indoor part. And I took a picture of her, and she has this big grin on her face, and it was incredible. And when we saw McCutcheon, she's like, he is so down to earth. He's so. He's the Bill Robinson of today, and I like that. I like hearing that.
I'm going to tell him that. Yeah. That's really cool.
That's really cool
He'll
because
appreciate that.
Bill Robinson was, for older Pirate fans, he was not the superstar. He was. You'd think about Parker and Stargell and even Omar Moreno and those guys, but Robinson was so clutch And I remember Ted listening to games in the Harrisburg area, and he was one of my favorites too because he was so clutch, and he hit, I think, 2 home runs one night to win the. And afterward, they had him on the post-game show, and they said, "What is it about you that you can come up big in these clutch situations?" And he quoted the former Dodger Willie Davis. He said, "It's not my wife, it's not my life, so why worry?" And he says, "I think about that every time when I come to the plate in a tough situation."
Will you say that one more time? I love that.
It's not my life, it's not my wife, so why worry?
Wow. That's great.
And
it's a game.
And that's on brand with what he was, right?
Yes.
You know?
And he was just so clutch. And so you bring your mom to that game, and what a moment that must have been that you were able to share that moment with her at PNC Park, and she had not been to a game in a long time.
No, both my parents were against the bond issue that created PNC Park, and then
Will you explain that?
Well, basically, as I you could probably explain it better than me, but essentially, that they wanted to borrow money to build PNC Park, and as I recall, and I'm not wire sure as we say for this, but it was rejected, but then they did it anyway.
Yeah.
And my father was like, "I'm not going to go to a game." My father was this like baseball lover since the 20s, and he's like, "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to go to a game." And so finally, I took him to a game, and we walk in, and you, as we all know, you see the city sprawled out before you, and it's magical. And he was won over. And same thing with my mother. I mean, she was, she had not been to PNC Park before that game in 2013, and I was worried about the verticality of it because she wasn't walking well and stuff. And I mean, she couldn't, like I said, she couldn't wipe the grin off her face.
Incredible.
And to see that, and to see that she was letting in baseball again. You know, baseball, I love, and I said this in that essay you referenced, which is another deep cut. You did your homework.
Yeah.
Always.
I feel like there's so much ink about fathers and sons in baseball, and there's less ink about mothers and sons or mothers and daughters, and
which is wild.
And I think that's different in Pittsburgh a little bit. I mean, I know so many more women, both in my generation and any generation, who are into sports. But I wish there was more literature. I wish there was more, exploration of that, because my mother, I mean, she had this. I'm gonna go off script for a second, although I guess there's no script. So that Art Palin thing I was talking about in KDK.
Yes.
She won Pirate tickets because you had to come up with a cheer, and so she came up with this cheer it went, "Hang in there, each and every buck. You're in the race to stay. With just a little bit of luck, where there's a Willie, there's a way."
Wow, that gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, I love
that is so cool.
And so she won tickets, and they went with Trish Beatty.
Oh my gosh!
And Art Palin to a ball game, and I am so glad that my father was an obsessive taper of things, because I still have the sound of it. And
no way!
Yeah.
Wow.
That is so cool.
That's like the Pirates Star Spangled Banner.
But
right?
That's exactly right.
Because he's got the stars.
That's right.
It's about Willie.
That's right.
That's beautiful. Wow.
She was 2 days ago was the 6th anniversary of her death, and so I've been thinking about her a lot.
Oh my gosh!
And I just love that, and I hope that there's more literature and content and stuff like that about mothers and sons or mothers and daughters.
And I think
my mom was like, I call her Dorothy Mantooth, if you've ever seen that movie. She's incredible. She had a really bad life. By every stretch of the imagination, she shouldn't be the woman she is. And the fact that she gave me the life I have, and now having another son that I didn't know she was forced to give up. I mean, I would not be the man I am today without my mom. So, yeah, I think moms are
Well, how big into baseball is your mom? Now, of course.
How big she was into me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she'll watch the Pirates now.
So you brought her to baseball.
Yeah, her love for me and her want to be, the person that could elevate me or push me into, better than what she had. I mean,
have you written about that?
No.
You really should.
I'm not a very good writer, so maybe you can help me out.
I can absolutely help you out. But you're a good talker, and that's what makes a good writer.
I appreciate that.
Good talker, good thinker equals good writer.
All right.
Well, you got to
that's humbling. That's humbling coming from you.
That's Michael McHenry right there.
But that's a story that needs to be told, and I can guarantee you from stuff I've written about my parents, it will make a difference. It will cut the best of grooves.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm in.
Yeah.
You sold me. That wasn't very hard, but you sold me.
But it is something. There's so many stories, and you and I have talked about this before, Ted. So many stories to be told. I mean, people that are watching or listening to this right now will be thinking about their mothers, and whether it's whether they turned you on to baseball, or vice versa, is the case with Michael, or the ties to Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania, what makes it so different and so unique. There is that story, those stories to be told.
I want to tell you a story about what my sister did when my father got Alzheimer's. It's directly related to that. So as I said, he was a Cleveland Indians fan. Earl Averill from Snohomish, Washington was his favorite player. And when he started to lose, I mean, he was an educator, and all of his knowledge sort of drained out the back of his head.
Unbelievable.
It's just
terrible,
horrible to watch. So she found autographed Cleveland Indians baseball from the early 30s on eBay. She got that, and she compiled this incredible notebook of clips and photos and things that were essentially, it was about baseball, but it was mnemonic devices. It was basically designed to draw out his memories that were in there. As my father put it before he lost too much memory, he said, it's all on the hard drive, but there's no icon to click on.
Brilliant.
And so she did this, and for the last few years of his life, he had the Cleveland Indians with him again, which I absolutely love. And
that's incredible.
And he, we were talking about this earlier. He also left behind this.
That's incredible.
My grandfather had tickets to the 1920 World Series, Cleveland and Brooklyn.
So Ted is, if you're not watching, you're listening. Ted's showing a framed 2 tickets to the 1920 World Series between Cleveland and Brooklyn, unused.
And the question is, why didn't he use them? And, you talk about storytelling. That's a better story than having 2 ripped tickets that he used. Maybe he didn't get to see the game, but here we are 104 years later, and we're still talking about these tickets. And when you say people are out there thinking about their mothers and stuff, right? People don't realize that their stories matter. They think that, okay, it might matter to the next person at the dinner table, it might matter to the cousin, but that's the patchwork, right? That's the patchwork of Pittsburgh or of any community.
Yep. That story that matters to you matters to others because it matters to them. It's that tie.
And then when you bring them together and you have a whole cluster of them, all of a sudden you start seeing the texture of a community.
Whoa, yeah.
Right?
You mentioned Cleveland, so your dad was from Cleveland?
My dad, Anthony's go back in Cleveland to cleared the forest in 1832 west of Cleveland, and so we've done a lot on our family history. And Cleveland was very important to them. But then my grandfather, who I just mentioned, was a clerk for the New York Central Railroad, so they moved from Cleveland to Detroit in '37, and so he became a Tigers fan. So the one through line is I was raised to not like the Yankees. That's universal in Pittsburgh.
Yes, that is universal.
That is no doubt.
Opening day, baby.
Well, so Ted, what's your first? Do you have one first memory that stands out of the Pittsburgh Pirates?
So there was a thing that they used to do at Three Rivers called Jacket Day. And it had they gave out these jackets that were supposed to be pirate jackets, but effectively they were like black and gold hefty bags, right?
Yeah, like rain slickers.
Yes, the things that if it rained in the summer, you'd be like drenched.
Yep.
And so we went to Jacket Day. And this is a pirate story, but not a pirate story. We went to Jacket Day. We're seeing, Richie Hebner, Richie Zisk, Frank Tavares those years, you know. And this was before Tanner was manager. This was the year that Murtaugh's last year. And afterward, I go under Gate A, which, as you'll recall, is where the players went in and out, and to get autographs. There were always this phalanx of kids there waiting for autographs. So we were getting autographs. And I had been a baseball fan for all of that summer and for much of the previous year, but I had not really been to a game. And so this guy comes out in a suit, and it's Vin Scully.
Oh.
Right?
Hello.
And somehow I know it's Vin Scully. So I go up to him, and I ask him for an autograph on my scorecard. And he smiles at me, and he says, "Son, I don't mean to disappoint you, but I'm not a player." And I said, "No, I know who you are, Mr. Scully. Can you sign my..."
You should ask him if he knew who you were.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was published at 11.
So he gave me an autograph. He gave me an autograph. And I love the fact that, while all these kids were, and rightly so, going after the players, I love that this guy who was just sort of standing there in the corner watching the Pirates come out, who was a Dodger, right? I mean, and that is like my one of my earliest memories of baseball was that day.
Isn't that incredible? It's funny you say that because I remember, like it was yesterday, when I first met Lanny Terry as a young kid outside Gate A. And similar story, he was just so kind. And I was so nervous. My knees were shaking because for me, that was almost my Willie Stargell and Omar Moreno. It was meeting Lanny Terry.
Oh, I'll bet. And, you know, it's interesting because I've learned this in journalism because, you know, I'm primarily a writer, but we're all multi-format journalists now. I mean, as you prove, setting up the whole shebang.
Had help.
But there's something, and I mean, you know this well, there's something incredibly intimate about the voice. We talked about this when I did that story on umpires' voices.
That's right. That's right.
And you know, you're the person you listen to on NPR or whatever. You're waking up in the morning with them. You know, you might be showering with them. I won't go any further down that road. But I have friends at NPR, and it's like I actually know them, so they're personal to me. But the people you hear on the radio, I remember being under my covers at night with this radio, and I would pull in because AM radio could pull in from a long way away. I heard Chicago Cubs broadcasts, you know, when they did night games. I heard KYW in Philadelphia, and the people like you, they went. This is a good example of it. I got the good fortune of going to North Korea a few times in my role as Asian news director, and I wasn't there as a journalist. I was there as kind of a suit to push for access for us. And at one point, they decided to take us out to this national park because we weren't allowed to go outside Pyongyang without escorts. And we stopped at some kind of rest stop and on the side of the road, and I realized that against all odds, because North Korea is very, very locked down, I have an international cell phone signal at that moment. So what do you think is the first thing I did?
Made a call.
Nope.
Took a picture?
I powered up the MLB app because it was like 9 in the morning.
Oh, I should have known that.
It was like 9 in the morning. I thought, can I get the Pirates from here? Oh. So I have like 2 bars, right? It's middle of North Korea. Suddenly, it clicks, it takes, and this is an early version of MLB TV. And suddenly, in the rural fields of North Korea comes the voice of one Greg Brown.
No.
And
in North Korea.
Yeah. And so that
Rocky Man probably wanted to listen too, right?
But so I'm thinking, of course, what I'm thinking is, okay, the tech guys at MLB, you know, they're probably tracking the IP addresses, and then one IP address.
Yes. Oh yeah, you know, it popped up like, what?
But I mean,
untapped market, yes.
That's right. That's right. We're in.
You have called a game.
Man, that is
available
wild.
in North Korea. How does that make you feel?
It's humbling. Humbling.
Your voice carries, my friend.
Yeah, that's wild.
That's crazy.
Wow. Well, now, but your father and grandfather were both Cleveland fans, right? And
I think my great-grandfather, because when my uncle, John Bradley Anthony, told me before he died that something very vague about how his father, who was my great-grandfather, liked baseball. And this was when it was like the Cleveland Spiders or the Cleveland Naps or what have you.
Yes.
And after Nap LaJoie. And so it may go back even further than my grandfather. I don't know. But yeah, it's...
Did you say Naps?
The Naps.
That's a terrible
Nap
baseball
LaJoie.
name.
It was after Nap LaJoie.
Yeah, the player. Yeah.
Like Naps?
Yes.
Yeah? Like they put you to sleep?
Yes.
I mean, that's just
easy.
Easy right there. Man, that's terrible. Yeah. I got to do better than that. I like spiders. Especially if you got a good pitching staff or a good bullpen.
Yeah.
Right?
Come on, bite you.
Yeah. Just arms coming everywhere. Yeah.
Well, so what about the story about your grandfather and he passed along? Was it a box score or...
No.
You told us about, or
no? There's a cigar band story. I think
okay.
What you might be referring to. So, my grandfather, when I was growing up, I never knew my grandfather. He died in '54. And when I was growing up, my father had this in his study this overstuffed couple notebooks of cigar bands from the early 1900s that my grandfather had collected. And he ended up selling them. It's like the only thing my father ever got rid of family history, but he ended up selling them to some guy who collected them in the North Hills. And that's what I remember of it, right? So that 30 years pass, 35 years pass. I get this email out of the blue from a guy who is a Mark Twain biographer. And as you probably know, Mark Twain loved cigars. And he says, are you related to an Edward Mason Anthony from Cleveland, Ohio, who was alive, who would have been about 12 years old in 1906. I'm like, as it happens, I am.
Oh.
So it turns out he's compiling a book of letters that were written to Mark Twain from the public and answers to them. And my grandfather, at age 12, had sent...
Of course.
Yeah, right.
Just know you beat him.
Stop.
Just know you beat him.
So he wrote to Mark Twain and asked for cigar bans because there was like this feature in the Chicago Tribune about Mark Twain's cigars. And so my grandfather wrote to him and said, I collect them. I live in Cleveland. Da, da, da. Can you send me some of the ones that you have if you're not throwing them away? And he got a nice note back, not from Mark Twain, but from Mark Twain's personal secretary saying, Mr. Twain thanks you for, or Mr. Clemens, they referred to him as Mr. Clemens. Mr. Clemens thanks you for your letter and wishes you the best of luck. He has a young person to whom he supplies, and they call them life belts for cigars.
Oh, my gosh.
Why did they refer to him as Clemens?
That was
his real name.
That was his birth name. Mark Twain is like, it means like 2 fathoms. It was his pen name.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I didn't know that.
And so he sent me a copy of the letter in my 12-year-old grandfather's handwriting, which is like the same handwriting he had at age 60. And I have a copy of that. And I loved that because it was like, here's this kid out of nowhere who thrusts this thing into the sort of matter stream of history. And then it comes back at his grandson more than 100 years later.
And the cigar bans. He's 12. I know it's a different time, but like that's a crazy thing. I don't know any 12-year-olds collecting cigar bands now, right?
I don't know any now doing that.
And he didn't smoke cigars, according to my father. He smoked cigarettes, but he was.
But do you think it was just because of Mark Twain?
No, because he has all these others in those notebooks. So I mean, I think I'm sure someone in the family did because there were like hundreds of them. You know?
So he probably looked up to somebody, and then that's kind of how. So that's really cool.
Yeah, but I love that because it's like
Yeah.
it's these
so
little.
cool.
That's one of those stories. It's these little brushes with history that you sort of pass in the night, right?
Well, now, speaking of your grandfather, he wasn't able to listen to the games when he worked, right? So your grandmother helped. How?
So as I said, my grandfather was a clerk for the railroad, and he had when he was about 16 or 15, I think he had polio, which was a huge thing back during World War I, and he couldn't fight because of it. And so he had this boot, and he walked with a limp. And when they started broadcasting games in the late 20s, my grandmother would be at home during the day with my father, who was not yet in school, and she'd listen to the games on the huge radio in their living room that sat on the floor. And Jack Graney, who was a very famous broadcaster, was calling the games, and she would keep score. She would on like pulp paper, she would draw grids, and she would keep score for my grandfather, and then they would go out to the front stoop, and the streetcar at the end of the day would let my grandfather off of the streetcar when he's coming home from work with a bunch of other guys. And my father, who was like 6 or 7, would see which one was his father down the block because of his polio shoe and how he was walking. And he'd run down the street holding the score sheet and hand it to my grandfather so my grandfather could immediately see what the Indians had done.
Wow.
You know?
That's like a Hallmark movie.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It's veering into Mitch Albom territory a little bit.
Yeah, it really is.
Wild.
And that takes us kind of into the early days of the box scores, which your grandmother was basically making her own box score for your grandfather.
Yeah.
But you
What a
talked
great
about
lady,
this
by the
before.
way.
Oh, isn't that tremendous?
Right?
Yes. Oh, so great.
Well, she was a fan too. I mean, it wasn't. But
Yeah.
It's a labor of love.
But but we talked about what I love about we're so much now. The media industry has been upended. People are consuming media in so many different ways, and we're looking for alternative story forms, right? Things that will resonate with audiences. And when I teach writing, one of the things I show a box score from like 1885 because the box score in the newspaper is like one of the earliest alternative story forms in journalism. It's got characters. It's got time that you move through. It's got conflict. It's got a very specific and exciting outcome, all there in those columns and those numbers and those names. And to me, you look at a box score and the whole game opens up to you. I used to be obsessed with box scores when I was a kid.
Likewise. And you wonder, are those days dwindling? I wonder how many pay attention to that box score. Where that story now the story is told to you on the app. Play by play is literally given to you.
I love the game day part of MLB where you can look at the different things. But
that's neat.
There is something to deciphering that. I have a good friend in journalism. You actually may have met him. His name, Dave Jones. He used to cover Penn State for years for the Patriot News. And he has this idea for a next generation box score. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with it. He just retired. And I mean, those things, I know we all have, we're connected 24/7, we have our devices, but sitting there visualizing a baseball game through its box score, it's so cool. And that's, the reason I teach with that is because people are accustomed to telling stories in certain ways, but there are all kinds of other ways to tell stories that will punch through the static. And for people in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, box score was punching through the static, and people went through those. And
you used your imagination. Yeah. That was you would look at the box score and you would try to figure out and imagine that home run that was hit in the 5th inning with 2 men on base, what it was, where it was. You can see who hit it when and off of whom. And
you can do it the next day in the paper, or you can do it 100 years later.
That's exactly right.
And I mean, I look at these pirate box scores from the first decade of the 20th century. Fred Clark, Deacon Philippe, Hannes Wagner, obviously, all of that. And they come alive in one line, and you see the little,
cool.
You see the little, because the type isn't perfect in early newspapers, and you think someone saw this the day that happened, and that's so cool.
Ted, you talk about your early days and your first memories as a fan. Does one moment aside from that wild card game stand out? One Pirate moment, a win, a home run, something in particular aside from that wild card game?
I think one moment. God, it's so hard to narrow.
It's so hard. I know it's not really a fair question because so many memories
you can pick
run
one.
through you.
I mean, I think in '82.
That's great.
His memory. I see that Rolodex going. He's like 24.
Yeah.
82.
Yes, there we go.
I'm ADHD, and so
me too.
Everything in there
you two get along great.
Yeah.
So, but
we were doing jumping jacks before we got on.
It was Stargell Appreciation Day. It was in September of '82. It was his last day. You got a little brochure when you went in that I still have with a painting of Stargell on the front. And I remember because it seemed like all of these things came together. My Pittsburgh stuff, my China stuff, Falk School, and knowing Kelly and Willie Jr., who they called Sun.
That's right.
And all of this stuff, it was like I realized that on that day that I was sort of a part of all these different little strands of things. And it all came together on the last day of Stargell's career. And I love that. And I don't think, I didn't have the wherewithal to articulate that then, but I remember I had all the feels that day. And my mother, who adored Stargell, was like crying when they introduced him and stuff. And so that, I know it's not an in-game moment, but that was a pretty cool moment.
But that was your moment. That's cool.
I think so.
Wow. Did Stargell actually visit school? Your school?
Yeah, he came and he was in that leisure suit. And he was.
That's right. He said that. Yeah,
I remember one time when he came to see.
Yeah.
I gotta find if there's a picture of that.
Oh, there are plenty of those.
I want to see if I can match that leisure shoot.
There was a lot of chest shown.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So,
and
Jones.
Jared Jones.
Jared Jones. Yeah. Call that manhood.
Yeah.
And we had done a school play, and I think one of the kids had been in it, and I was in it, and I remember being there. Like I don't think I was saying anything at the moment, but I was on the stage, and he had an aura, he had charisma,
yes.
and so he walks in, and he's like trying to make himself smaller, which with Willie Stargell was generally not possible. And he sat down, and he watched the play, and he was and when people went up to him and asked him for his autograph afterward, he said, "I'm just a dad today." And I thought that was so cool. Albeit, he gave out Stargell stars.
Yeah.
But he just wanted to be a dad at Falk School.
So the Stargell stars, for people that may be listening that aren't from Pittsburgh, don't remember, explain that, because you've mentioned it twice, and obviously the actual like BP hats this year had the stars on it, and I loved it. So explain that a little bit.
So in round about 77 or so, they started wearing these pillbox hats with stripes on them. You can now still buy.
1976, it was the bicentennial, and all National League teams wore the pillbox caps.
But the Pirates kept them.
The Pirates kept them. Everybody else did it for a year. They didn't like it. The Pirates liked it and kept it.
And not only that, but after 76, when they were still wearing the earlier uniforms, they switched to the mix and match, gold, black, and pinstripes, and you never knew what they were going to be wearing.
Yeah.
They would change during double headers, stuff like that.
I love it.
And so the pillbox hats, the black ones, he would put. First, he started putting they were just little gold stars made of embroidered with a black S on them, and they stuck to the hat. And he would give them out. I forget why he gave them out. Maybe when someone homered.
It was almost like the star of the game.
Yeah.
In his mind.
And so
yeah.
slowly, gradually, we noticed that these all the Pirates players in the dugout and on the field, they had various permutations of these stars. And by '79, it was the thing. Mm-hmm. And everybody loved them. But, you couldn't get them then. This was before they sold all the gear to the public. And so for us in '79, getting these Stargell stars from Stargell, it was really
that's
cool.
the only way to get them. Willie Stargell had to give you this star.
Yeah.
So the players would have them occasionally. He'd give
How
them
are we
out
not bringing that back?
Well, Jeff Bannister did that a few years ago when Banny was the bench coach. He tried to bring those back. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to recreate that. I mean...
But they did with the ones that get sold in the store. They still, when they have the pillbox hats, they have the stars, but they're embroidered,
right.
and they don't have an S on them. But
right.
it looks like it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But it was. I was lucky enough to get 2 of them. I gave one to my sister, who's also a huge Pirate fan, and she kept it for like 35 years, and then gave it back to me long after mine was done. So I have one original one right now.
I mean,
but it was such a. That's another. We talk about community and what makes you a Pittsburgher. That's one of those things. That was the Pirates' terrible towel.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So it needs to come back.
Well, it helps. It helps when you're winning too. We've talked about that before. You
can't wait for it.
No,
we've talked about that.
Got to be prepared to win. Mentioned meeting Willie Stargell. Your son eventually did he meet Travis Snider? He became his favorite player.
Oh yeah. So this is a great story. So summer of 2013, Travis Snider's up to the plate, and my son was then 6, and you're calling the game. And we're sitting in our living room in the dark, and he says, bases are loaded. He says, Travis Snider's going to hit a grand slam. And we're like,
oh, boy.
Wyatt, you always say that. And he's like, no, this time I mean it.
He's Bob Walk.
I say,
he's Bob Walk, yeah. Bob Walk is always calling a homer, and he's like, I'm never wrong because when I'm right, that's all they remember.
And he's this little guy, and he's under the blanket, and he's like, no, this time I mean it. I know I've said it before, but this time is different.
Ooh.
Next
he
pitch.
Had a feel.
Next pitch. Boom.
Come on.
And we hear you saying grand salami.
Wow.
And so he was so happy, and he became obsessed with Travis Snider. And for a while, it was a little sort of Rain Man-like. For a while, everything was 23. He would draw 23. It was a little bit like Red Rum.
Yes.
He was
Snider's number.
Red Rum.
Yeah. Everything was 23. I would go when we moved to Thailand, and I would go to hotels and go to the 23rd floor and photograph 23 for him.
Oh, cool.
So intentional. I love this.
So great.
So he drew this picture. I don't know if you remember, but Travis, I'm sure you do. Travis Snider had the pink cheeks.
Yeah.
And so
still does.
My son did
lunchbox.
Lunchbox.
Yeah, lunchbox.
Cooked the best steak I've ever had.
Yeah.
And he does it on Instagram all the time.
Oh, so good.
So we moved to Bangkok, and he draws a picture of Travis Snider, and I tweeted at Travis Snider, who tweets back at him. And my son's so excited. And I ended up writing a piece about how Travis Snider was, for a 6-year-old moving to Bangkok, like I got dragged away in '79. This Travis Snider focus was his way of holding on to home and to Pittsburgh. Wow. And so I wrote this. I put it on. It wasn't for the AP. I just wrote it personally on Medium, and because I know a lot of sports writers, it got circulated around. And the PR person for the Orioles, because it was written because he had been traded, and Wyatt was so upset that he had been traded to the Orioles. So the PR person for the Orioles picks up on this, and her name, I don't know if you remember her name, is Kristen Hudak.
Yes.
And she's a Johnstown person, right? And so she arranges for A, care package to get sent to Thailand with Travis Snider stuff, B, Travis Snider to record a video for Wyatt, and C, the pièce de résistance, she invites us to Camden Yards when we're home for the summer in 2015. So we go, my kids get to take batting practice inside under the stands with Travis and Manny Machado, who was with the Orioles at the time.
That wasn't cool at all.
No.
Jeez Louise.
Because we knew how much he loved food, Wyatt brought him a street food book from Bangkok.
Oh, that's so
And
cool.
Travis gave him a bat and a glove and stuff, and they're still in touch. I mean, and Wyatt turns 18 today, and they still go back and forth sometimes. And Wyatt follows his Instagram, and in fact, my wonderful soon-to-be ex-wife, who is the editor of Kidsburg, the website for parents in Pittsburgh, had just had him on their new podcast, and he He's doing some wonderful work now around emotional health and teenagers and things like that. And he is a solid individual.
He's
My
great.
goodness.
Incredible
he's been through
teammate.
so much in his life, too.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
You know, and he's giving back.
Ebbs and flows. I mean, he got to big leagues super young.
But he made an impression on our family. And,
That's
I
incredible.
think what I love about it is that, with no disrespect to people like McCutcheon, they're the stars. People love them. Travis Snider was a great ball player, but he was not the center of attention always. And I loved that Wyatt focused on this guy who works his butt off, who is making good, and who is willing to interact. And that's, that to me is a throwback to when people lived here during the off season. I used to work at Shop and Save, and I think Bill Mazeroski was working for some grocery wholesaler for a while, and he would stop by. When players in the off season would sort of really interact.
We talk about that all the time. The roots aren't deep enough. I believe that matters so much. Like if you go over right now into the clubhouse, I've talked about this on the podcast before, but there's no locker that has anything in it. When I was in Colorado, I would walk into their locker room, and they would have ropes for Todd Helton, for Matt Holliday, for even when Hop was there. But it was cool because I walk in, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Todd Helton has 2 lockers. Yeah, absolutely.
But you chose to put down roots here.
I did.
I mean, so you're now a part of the community, right?
Yeah, I'm a Yalzer is what I say. My wife's, every time I say that, she's like,
great?
We got to trademark that. I'm like,
that
we
is
will.
so good. Yeah.
But
That's really good.
So you got 2 new things today. You got the Yalzer and you got the sound of the lighter at the beginning.
Well, that leads me to...
oh.
And now Gustine at the plate. Frankie Gustine. There's a line drive right field, and that's going to bug on the rug. That's going to score a couple. Frankie Gustine. Who's got that restaurant down there in Oakland?
So, Frankie Gustine's Restaurant by Forbes Field.
He just burnt the mic, folks.
My father took me there all the time to get the turkey Devonshire. I don't know if you ever heard of turkey Devonshire. I'm sure you have. Classic Pittsburgh dish. It's basically toast, turkey, bacon, cheese sauce. Where are you going to go wrong?
You can't go wrong.
And they had like this,
anything with bacon on it, as long as you put mayonnaise near it, it's perfect.
My older son now cooks bacon in clarified bacon grease that he bought. So
why aren't we friends?
Yes.
That's great.
So we would go there, and somehow in these pre-eBay, pre-internet days, my father got me a Frankie Gustine card from '49, a Bowman card, before Topps. And we go in, and he says, why don't you ask the bartender if we can get him to sign it? And so I take it up to the bartender. He says, come back next Tuesday. And come back next Tuesday. He hands it back. And I have
my gosh,
Frankie Gustine 1949 autograph card that my father got for me.
Wow.
Little card. It's fraying. It's
oh my gosh.
But it's that he
that is so
autographed
neat.
that, and he made another one that made a friend for life. And so years later, because of the tie with my father, I had a jersey made at PNC Park that was Gustine 16. And one day I'm walking around by I guess by the rotunda, and these people come up to me, and they're like, we are Frankie Gustine's grandkids, and we've never seen this before, and it made them so happy. And I get the people notice that. There's what's the guy's name? Forgive me. The gentleman, Baseball
Joe.
Baseball Joe,
Vogel.
yeah. And Baseball Joe accosted me at a food stand.
He will.
Did he toss you the ball?
And he's got but he had his keyboard because of his stroke.
He still writes me emails.
And so he's typing out on the keyboard about how excited he is to see a Frankie Gustine jersey. So these things, there are these through lines. There are these through lines that keep going.
And it frustrates
I'm just blown away at the card.
Yeah, it's just so great. And
this has been up. This has been up with me for 45 years now. I guess 40 years.
Oh my gosh. Frankie Gustine was such a gentleman. His kids, grandkids.
You knew him?
Toward the end of his life. Yeah, got a chance to just a class act. His kids, just as classy, and we talked about how important history is, and that's in society and life,
and how it's passed on through family.
Yes, but it seems to me, Ted, and I think Michael agrees that too many of us in the game of baseball have kind of lost that. We forget the importance of history.
So how do you bring it back? Because I mean, this is a game that I would argue, and again, I'm going to out myself. I am not a huge sports fan. I'm a baseball fan, and I mean, I watch the Steelers, I watch the Pens, but it's baseball that has stuck with me. But baseball is such a sport of history. I mean, you do it all the time. You know, you're pulling out like Kai Kyler references. And
well, you got to be careful because some people don't care for that too much. And I understand that. You know, you don't want to go too far into the history
maybe they should turn off
books.
the radio between pitches.
Well, that's an idea. That's a good call.
Well, hello.
Go back to the box scores. Ted, we talked about you as a writer, as a 10-year-old, but you got to tell us the story away from sports about the book. You were kind enough to autograph for me, and I read, and it's fascinating in that you chased I think, in fact, the book's title was Chasing the Rising Sun, The Journey of an American Song. Several years ago, you wrote this book about an iconic song that's been, well, it's brought back to life in many movies. I think the one that comes to mind for me was Casino.
Yes.
But your journey into chasing the rising sun.
I love that you remember Casino. That was an intense scene.
Oh, man.
So it's
There was a man from New Orleans.
I'm not singing.
Oh, you could, but the lyrics.
There is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun.
They call the rising
yeah,
sun.
great.
It's been the ruin of many.
That's in a ton of great movies.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Animals, by the way, I guess.
The Animals popularized it. But so I'm sitting in a Thai restaurant in New Hampshire with my then girlfriend who would become my wife.
Yeah, you probably get really confused with food, don't you?
Yeah, really.
You've been everywhere.
And so we're listening, and there's this like background music, elevator music playing. And we're like, this sounds familiar. What is this? And we realize it's House of the Rising Sun. And, you know, I say this in the book, I don't usually believe in epiphanies. I believe that knowledge is accumulated gradually. But I had this epiphany for once. And it said that the story of how this song became background music in a Thai restaurant in New England is the story of American music in the 20th century and how it went, you know, something that started local. At that time, I thought it had started in New Orleans. I would later find it was from Appalachia. But I wanted to know where this song came from, and I became obsessed with it. And you can't write a book unless you're obsessed. You really can't, you know. And it goes back to ADHD, as you know. If you have ADHD, you can't focus on anything until you can, and when you can, you focus on nothing else.
Yeah.
And
it's that hyper focus. Yeah.
And so I wrote a piece for the AP. I found the 15-year-old girl, the family of the 15-year-old girl who had sung it for this musicologist named Alan Lomax, who was collecting songs in Appalachia in 1937, and basically had this giant recording machine in the back of his Studebaker. And I traced it for the AP story, and then it wasn't enough. And so I said, I want to write a book. And I spent years tracking, and what I realized early on was I tracked this song back as far as I could. It has roots in old Scotch-Irish balladry, but also some mix with some African-American music from Appalachia and a lot of Appalachian hill ballads. And I realized I wasn't going to find its origins. But the book became about where it traveled, and that was a lot more of an interesting book. And I found like 90-year-old musicians who had been completely forgotten, who had sung early recordings of it in the 30s and stuff like that. And on the flip side of it, I sang it in a karaoke bar in Bangkok, and I talked about the diaspora and how it spread around. And it was such a wonderful experience because my father said to me when I was growing up, you can't leave the house until you either learn how to play the piano or learn how to type. And I learned how to type, and that set my direction. But that moment was when the music was in me, and I really loved finding out all of these people and these places and how music evolved and how things go viral long before we were talking about going viral. How things go from tiny towns and mining communities and farming communities to, you know, this guy Alan Lomax, who was friends with Woody Guthrie and Leadbelly and Pete Seeger, and so and from them it went to Bob Dylan and Dave Van Ronk, and then the Animals, and from there it went everywhere because it's a public domain song. So any musician playing in a bar or cutting their first album, they want to do it because it's this compelling song that it could be about. It's specific and universal. It could be about you know, a house of ill repute. It can be about a gambling addiction. It can be about drinking. But it has specifics like New Orleans, like one foot on the platform, the other one on the train. And so it's this song that is so compelling to so many people, and it's been remixed and redone in hundreds of ways. I had to detox after the book. I couldn't listen to it.
How long did it take you to research it? And you traveled all over the world to track down the history of this song.
Yeah, and in fact, it took up our honeymoon. We drove around the South listening to to old music and talking to people. But I mean, how long it took me is kind of a bit illusory, because it took me 7 years, but that's because 9/11 and Afghanistan and Iraq and having a kid and moving back to
life hit.
Life,
Yes.
exactly. Life.
Yes.
But I would say that totally it probably took me, if you compressed all the obsession and the research, it probably took me about 3 years, and took me all these places I never thought I'd be, like rural Missouri, where I found a version, Lowestoft, England, where the song might have come from, that kind of thing. And it was fun. It was fun. It was like, it was an excuse. Somebody once said that the best kind of journalism is being a social anthropologist with a press pass.
That's
and
good.
I got to have glimpses into people's lives, and they trusted me to tell their stories. Not the people who have an obligation to tell their story, like leaders and politicians and people like that, but people who didn't have that obligation, who could have sent me packing, but instead they invited me into their homes. They told me about their fathers or their grandfathers or their grandmothers, and it was an emotional experience. And the end of it, I gathered the family of the woman who sang the version that is responsible for us knowing it. And she had died of like emphysema at age 49 in like the 60s. And they were getting minimal royalty checks, like, 75 cents here and there. And I found the recording in the Library of Congress, and I played it for her kids, and they hadn't heard her voice.
Oh my gosh.
Because, I mean, they were poor, and this wasn't like, you don't have your
good for you. That's
Otter
incredible.
or your voice recorder on your phone. And so they got to hear her singing, and that was like an unparalleled moment in my life. I've gotten to do all kinds of cool things, and that is the nub of it. That's what makes it worthwhile.
Might be the top of the list right there.
I think so.
Did you meet Eric Burton, by the way?
I did, in New Orleans. He answered
Eric
the door.
Burton of the
He answered the door with a Hawaiian shirt wide open, so
Manhood.
got to see a lot of Eric Burton.
Yeah.
And we sat
like the
and
Big
talked
Lebowski.
Yeah. But best story he told me was he was once traveling by himself, and he went into some bar to have a drink, and they were doing karaoke. And he went up and he sang House of the Rising Sun. Nobody knew who he was.
My
And he
gosh.
comes back to the bar, and someone says to him,
You're pretty good.
That wasn't too bad.
Oh my gosh. That really
awesome.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
So
Ted,
that was so much
that's
fun.
Amazing. Unbelievable stories. And we cannot thank you enough for, we would plead with you to come back and join us on another
I would love
Hold
that.
My
This
Cutter.
is fun.
Yeah.
And it
We've
just-
only been through about half
just
the world.
touched- Yeah, barely touched the surface here.
I have been more fortunate than I ever dreamed, and it's important for me to always keep that in mind, because the Associated Press is an incredible organization. It's got people everywhere. We always joke, when you work for the AP, no matter what country you lose your wallet in, you can get help. And
That's incredible.
that is, there are people who risk their lives every day. We have people in Gaza, we have people in Ukraine, and I don't do that kind of stuff anymore, but we have people who do every day, and they continue to be my heroes. And every day, my mother, when I started with the Patriot News and finished at Penn State, my mother said, every day for you is going to be an education that you get paid for, and that hasn't changed. And I am still gratified every time I get to write something, every time I get to talk to someone who, by all rights, has no reason to talk to me, but is willing to. And we live in a polarized time, so to be able to meet people and make these little connections, that's what it's all about, right?
It really is.
Now, you
Wow.
settled in Pittsburgh now, right?
I split the time between Pittsburgh and New York, but I live in the house that I grew up in. We bought it, and there are good things and bad things about living in a multi-generational house. There's a lot of ballast of history, both good and grief. My parents left a lot behind. I'm still sorting through it after 16 years. But yeah, Pittsburgh is in my veins. The only two towns I've ever felt truly at home in are Pittsburgh and Beijing. And I love this place. And I feel like for years I was focused on New York, and I didn't. Now I'm on the board of directors of Public Source, which you may have heard of. It's the local digital news organization. And I'm trying to not just skate on the surface, but dig in. So I really appreciate your willingness to have me here and to let me be
Absolutely.
Well,
a little
hey,
bit part of Pittsburgh.
our next project, by the way, we talked about this a couple of years ago, of the great minor league nicknames, right, and the origins.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that? We talked about that?
That's
I
a cool
would love
thought.
to do that. I wrote about minor league baseball teams and how they brand and stuff a few years back, and we got to talking about, because that's another thing. It is so community specific, and it is so, I
love that.
You can tell the story of a community in many cases through its minor league baseball team and what they do, how their logo, their name. It's like this community history in postage stamp size, right?
Yeah, some of the best stories are the minor leagues.
Johnstown.
I mean, yeah, I dug in with Johnstown this past year. It's remarkable, like what all that city's been through and how baseball is literally at the core of everything there. It gave them hope. And, I was just on a podcast the other day that talked about 79 World Series. During that time, sports in general really pulled everybody out of a deep depression. Could have been a Great Depression, but that's where they went to have solitude, to have, a getaway of some sort because the city was losing everything. The steel mills were closing and everything else. And I heard that over and over in Johnstown. It was remarkable, but the people are really what make it.
You're going to get sick of me saying this, but you should write about that.
Folks, I'll be writing.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah.
I'm not letting you off the hook on this.
Fair enough. I love that.
In the meantime, we'll be listening and watching Hold My Cutter. Can't thank Ted Anthony enough.
Thank you
Ted,
for the cigar.
Hope the cigar, and hope you enjoyed the coffee. Good coffee here at Burn by Rocky
Yes, sir.
Patel.
Yeah, the cafe.
Enjoy your coffee and your stogie next time on Hold My Cutter.